Hello everyone and welcome back to this week's video. This week we are looking at A Christmas Carol and the presentation of The Ghost of Christmas Present. As always, we start with Dickens's intentions. So why has he constructed the Ghost of Christmas Present in this particular way, and what does he want to reveal to his readers? So the first thing is, as Dickens uses the Ghost of Christmas Present to emphasise the prevalent existence of poverty. Okay, think about that key word, present. This is the reality of what is going on in current society. And it's this idea that we've got that existence of poverty in the face of the abundance celebrated at Christmas time. Dickens also uses Scrooge's sinful behaviour to warn his readership against societal neglect. And Dickens uses the reference to Malthusian attitudes to condemn the response society has towards those who live in poverty. Okay, we already know that the ruling classes viewed those who lived in poverty as being idle and as being not worthy of any support. And finally, Dickens attempts to evoke sympathy from his readers to encourage a change in attitudes and therefore elicit some support for the poor. The Ghost of Christmas Present embodies the celebration of Christmas in the novella, and during stave 3, it's where the readers are taken on a journey of the different celebrations of Christmas morning, from the walk through the City of London, the observation of the Cratchit family's Christmas, Fred's family Christmas, and then we are taken to the rural workers, such as the miners, the lighthouse keepers, and the sailors. And all of these characters are celebrating Christmas. And for the readers, Christmas is a time of spiritual reflection on the important foundations of the Christian faith. It's a celebration, and it's when Christians celebrate God's love for the world through the birth of the Christ child Jesus. Okay, so Dickens uses this as his setting for his novella to really encourage his readers to open their minds to being more charitable towards those who are suffering at this time of Christian faith. We see the reference to when Fred says that Christmas is a time when men and women open their shut-up hearts freely, which really reveals Dickens's modus operandi, which means like his reason for writing the novella. Okay, because he sets the novella at this time because it is viewed as a time that has restorative qualities in society. It is a time when people are more likely to feel charitable and more likely to want to be more generous. When the Ghost of Christmas Present appears in Scrooge's house, Dickens really describes the transformation that Scrooge's room has undergone. Okay, we abandon the darkness, we abandon the gruel that is set by his fireplace, and we abandon that small fire. Okay, and Dickens transforms the room to foreshadow the changes that will take place with Scrooge. Okay, so it's generously decorated, it's abundant with food, and it is properly warm. And this image perhaps is Dickens using the description to reveal what can be enjoyed without the deterrent of Malthusian economic outlook. Got two quotations here. So hung with living green that it looked like a perfect grove, and bright gleaming berries, crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe and ivy. Firstly, the symbolism of the greenery at this time of year can be traced to ancient Rome, when evergreen branches were used to decorate houses around the turning of the new year to represent life during winter. You could also look at the imagery of green as symbolic of Scrooge's new life that awaits him if he transforms his attitudes. We've also got the reference to Christmas items such as holly, mistletoe and ivy. And holly has significant symbolic power because it represents peace and goodwill, and this is a subtle reference to Scrooge's impending transformation and his impending transformed attitudes, in which he becomes a a benevolent character and rejects his usual miserly attitude. The description of the second spirit is a direct contrast to the previous ghosts that Scrooge has met. Unlike their ethereal and translucent presence, the ghost of Christmas Present commands the space and it provides colour and joviality, which further strengthens the power of Christmas time, as it is impossible to ignore this presence and reinforces the overwhelming need for benevolence. With the reference to Plenty's horn, Dickens is nodding to classical mythology in which the horn of plenty is a symbol of abundance and contains inexhaustible gifts, which most often were food. This reference used by Dickens is a clear challenge to the Malthusian ideology learned by Victorian society, because Dickens here is proving that food is plentiful if wealthy members of society practice benevolent capitalism. The ghost states that he provides the peculiar flavour to any kindly given but a poor one most, and Dickens is calling to arms his readers as he's exposing the ability of the ruling class that their own wealth acts as the horn of plenty, and that they too can use their wealth to provide assistance to the needy. Okay, so now we're going to explore the first scene that the Ghost of Christmas Present and Scrooge are taken on. The Ghost of Christmas Present walks with Scrooge along the city of London, okay? And this is during Christmas morning, where we can see the celebration of Christmas in action. And Dickens states, "But soon the steeples call good people all to church and chapel." Now, there's a sense of irony here, okay? Because the good people who have entered the church most likely believe themselves to be good citizens. You can assume that they are praying for those in need, unaware that those very people are just outside the church, trying to warm their meals. So there's the reference to the innumerable people carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. If this is the case, then Dickens could be calling out these good people for their hypocrisy, okay? Because the act of prayer is not enough. Words don't help people directly, but actions do. That was Dickens's belief on Christianity. He was very much a believer that if you were enacting Christian morals, it was more to do with what you were doing than what you were saying you were doing, okay? So once the service ends, the poor will dissipate into invisibility, and those people who have power to help them will remain ignorant to their plight. Okay, so it's this idea that they'll go into church, they'll pray for the plight of the poor, leave the church, and then that is forgotten at that church door when the reality is still in existence. And that reference to the people carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops is Dickens criticising the act of Sabbatarianism and the belief of Sabbatarianism. So Sabbatarianism was when people spent Sunday going to church and resting and practising their Christian belief. Dickens was opposed to this because it meant that working poorer people were denied any enjoyment on their day off. Everything was shut, and not only that, poorer people who didn't have ovens because they couldn't afford it at home used the food, took their food to the local bakers and had their food cooked there. So essentially, this belief of Sabbatarianism meant that people were going without the one hot meal that they could get on the one day off that they had. During Stave 3, there is this repeated motif of food that is really, really obvious, okay? Not only is the Ghost Christmas Present, when Scrooge first sees him, is sat upon a throne made of turkeys, geese and game. When Scrooge is taken through the streets of London, there is this really vivid description of all of the shops that are advertising their wares, okay? The poulterers' shops, with the mounds and mounds of food that is piled high. Not only that, but we've also got the reference to the Cratchit family Christmas and the excessive description of their food. And this is no mistake, this is no accident, okay? So let's first look at the quotation. The poulterers' shops were still half open and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen. And one of the most important things to realise is that this description of food, okay, in the streets of London is utterly gauche, which literally means it's graceless, okay? And I say that because it is in comparison to the complete reality of the destitution of the poor. This spectacle of delicious food that's on display would have been an act of torture to London's poor, okay, who could never dream of tasting food like this. And it's also recognition from Dickens that the poor were confronted with these images in the markets and the shop windows day after day. And Christmas is a season, even today, where poverty and indulgence clash. It's really it's an unsettling description, okay? Maybe it is also a nod again to this idea of criticising any Malthusian followers, okay? Because what we can see is Dickens, through his excessive description of food, is once again proving that food is in abundance. There is no famine that is going to be on the doorsteps of the whole of the City of London, but it's again down to the ruling classes who have that wealth in order to provide for the poorer and more neglected members of society. You also have to realise that during this time of writing, there were 40,000 beggars in London on the streets, okay? And this vast number of the population would have been shut out from the depictions and descriptions that Dickens uses in the novella about food. Okay, now we're going to move on to the Cratchit Christmas celebration, and I'm only going to explore this one quotation, and it's when Scrooge announces that they should raise a toast for Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast. Now, Dickens uses this moment to critique the position exploitation plays in increasing destitution of the working and middle classes. Dickens describes the goose and the family's reaction and anticipation for this, goose that is central part of their feast on Christmas Day. But what you need to understand is, firstly, goose as a bird was the cheapest option for families to purchase for the celebration. And lots of families actually took part in something called a goose club, in which people paid a portion of their wages monthly so that they could acquire a goose by Christmas. Now, think about that again. Goose is the cheapest bird on offer, but there were still families that had to put away a small portion of their wage in order to be able to afford that central meat on Christmas Day. The irony here is that although Scrooge is named as the founder of the feast, and by employing Bob's wage of but 15 bob a week is pittance, and really exposes the reality for many working Londoners. You've got to remember as well that Bob is the representation of the lower middle class society. Okay, Dickens uses the Cratchit family to prove that if we have a family who there are many members of the family who work, you've got Bob, you've got Martha, and you've got Peter Cratchit, who is looking at a position, okay, that he will soon acquire. So 3 of the members of the family are working, but they are still living in very apparent poverty. Mrs. Cratchit is described as being brave in ribbons and a twice-turned gown, okay? And Dickens is doing this to remind the readers of the poverty that is felt widely among society. But if you've got these hard-working Londoners who are still living poverty, can you imagine the sympathy that Dickens is trying to elicit for the completely and utterly destitute? And we've got to look at this idea that Dickens is advocating for the ruling classes, those people with power, to use their wealth and social position to help, okay, and to recognise that they have a social responsibility. And finally, we're going to look at the presence of ignorance and want. Now, we have got a whole other video on ignorance and want that you will be watching, okay? This is just a small snippet in relation to the Ghost of Christmas Present. Ignorance and want are described as being yellow, meagre, ragged, scowling, and wolfish. They are portrayed as monsters or creatures, inhumane. And it's this idea that poverty has completely dehumanised them, removed any human characteristics. They are angry and utterly deprived. This is based on Dickens's personal experience when he witnessed how London society treated such children in imperfect systems, okay, such as the law that did not require all students to attend school. He visited a ragged school in which he saw the diabolical situation in which children were being apparently educated. It's also linking on to the motif of food from the previous slide, is this idea that we have got vivid signs of extreme starvation of these children, okay? And this would have been recognisable to a Victorian audience. They weren't blind to the starvation that was happening within society. Dickens is reinforcing how food has the power, because it has the power to reduce life significantly. And it's this idea that we've got gluttony and those vivid descriptions of those pot-bellied chestnuts and the Spanish onions, like Spanish friars, and the mouth-watering listing of food. And it's this idea that this food holds such a power over the poor. And it is only, again, Dickens trying to encourage the wealthy members of society to be charitable and extend their wealth to support the most neglected in society. We've also got the nod as well to the antithesis to the description of the throne, which I mentioned before. And again, Dickens reinforces the idea that actually food is plentiful if it is shared with those who are more, if those are shared by those who are more fortunate. Okay, that's us done for this week. Hope this was really useful, and I will be back again next week.